I thought I was doing everything right. I had 6 months of expenses sitting in a high-yield savings account, and honestly, it felt good. Every time I logged in and saw that number, something in my chest relaxed a little. That's what safe is supposed to feel like, right? But one night, kind of on a whim, I actually sat down and did the math. Real inflation, real interest rate, real numbers. And when I finished, I just stared at the screen for a minute. Because with inflation running around 7% that year, my safe money was quietly losing close to $200 a month in actual purchasing power. I wasn't saving. I was going broke slowly enough that it felt like progress. Here's the thing that's going to bother you for the rest of this video. There's a number most people never calculate, a threshold where your bank account can be growing every single month while you are, in every way that matters, becoming poorer. And the scarier part isn't the math. It's that the feeling of safety and the fact of safety have almost nothing to do with each other. By the end of this, you're going to understand why a raise can make you feel worse, why 6 months of savings might not protect you the way you think it does, and why the number on your screen is lying to you in a very specific, very predictable way. My name is Ely, and I spend way too much time thinking about how people in the US experience money psychologically. Not spreadsheets, not stock tips, just the actual lived experience of earning a paycheck in this economy and still feeling like you're standing on ice. If you're someone who earns a normal income, maybe even more than you used to a few years ago, but you still don't feel financially secure, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up, because that feeling is not a personal failure. And I think once you see why, you'll never look at your bank balance the same way again. Let's start with the account itself, because I think most people misunderstand what a savings account actually does. A savings account doesn't grow your money. It stores it. Those are two very different jobs, and we've spent decades treating them like the same thing. Growth means your purchasing power increases over time. Storage just means the number stays roughly where you left it, maybe ticking up a little from interest. The problem is that prices don't sit still while your money is being stored. Rent doesn't sit still. Groceries don't sit still. Car insurance, which has climbed faster than almost anything else the average household pays for, definitely doesn't sit still. So if your savings account pays you 4% and inflation is running at 7%, you're not standing still either. You're sliding backward at 3% a year, and it doesn't feel like sliding because the number on the screen keeps getting bigger. That's the trick. Nominal growth versus real growth. Your brain sees the sticker price of your savings. It almost never sees the shrinking size of what that money can actually buy. Now you might be thinking, okay, but 3% a year doesn't sound like much. Here's where it gets interesting. Run that same math over 5 years on $50,000 sitting in cash, and you've quietly lost somewhere around $7,000 to $8,000 of real value, without ever touching the account, without making a single bad decision, just by trusting that safe, mint, protected. That's not a rounding error. That's a car. That's a semester of tuition. That's the emergency fund you thought you had, worth noticeably less than you believed it was, exactly when you might need it most. But here's what most people don't realize, and this is the part that actually matters more than the math. The reason this feels so disorienting isn't the dollar loss. It's psychological. Humans are wired to respond to loss aversion, meaning we feel the pain of losing money roughly twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. But loss aversion was built for obvious losses, a stolen wallet, a bad investment, a bill you didn't expect. It was never built to detect a slow erosion that hides behind a number that's technically going up. So your nervous system, the part of you that's supposed to warn you when something's wrong, stays completely silent. No alarm bells, no stress response, just a quiet, steady leak that your body has no mechanism to notice. This is where it gets even more interesting, because it explains something that trips up almost everyone I talk to. Why does a raise so often feel disappointing? You'd think going from $65,000 to $75,000 a year would feel like relief. And for about a month, it does. Then it quietly stops. Researchers who study financial well-being, including work referenced by the Federal Reserve surveys on household economics, have found that a huge share of Americans, often somewhere around a third to nearly half, depending on the year, say they couldn't cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing or selling something. That number barely moves whether you're talking about someone earning $40,000 or someone earning 6 figures. Income goes up. The feeling of security doesn't follow it, because lifestyle quietly expands to absorb the gap. The nicer apartment, the newer car payment, the subscriptions you don't remember signing up for. None of it feels reckless in the moment. It feels like normal life. But it means the raise gets spent before it ever gets to do its actual job, which is building a buffer between you and financial panic. If this is starting to feel familiar, that's exactly why I make these videos. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because we're about to get into the part that actually changes how you think about this. There's a concept psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, and it explains why more income so rarely translates into more peace. Every time your earnings rise, your baseline expectations rise with it. Almost instantly, almost invisibly. The $40,000 version of you would have felt rich at $75,000. The current version of you, the one already living at 75, doesn't feel rich at all because the comparison point moved the moment the raise hit your account. You're not comparing yourself to where you started. You're comparing yourself to where you think you should be by now. And in America, that comparison point is being constantly, aggressively updated by everyone around you, whether it's a coworker's new car or a stranger's vacation photos. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has tracked wage growth for years, and even in periods where real wages technically outpaced inflation, consumer sentiment surveys often showed people feeling just as squeezed, sometimes more squeezed, than before. The math improved. The feeling didn't. That gap between the two is basically the entire subject of this channel. Here's another piece most people miss entirely, and it's about what 6 months of expenses is actually protecting you from. Financial advisors love the phrase emergency fund, but very few of them explain that the standard advice, 3 to 6 months of expenses, was built for a world with more stable employment, slower moving costs, and less volatile job markets. It wasn't designed with the idea that inflation could quietly eat a chunk of that fund while it sits there. It wasn't designed around medical bills that can swing from a few $100s to tens of thousands with almost no warning, something the American Psychological Association has repeatedly flagged as one of the top sources of financial stress in the country, specifically because of how unpredictable and uncapped those costs can feel. 6 months of expenses in cash is a starting point, not a finish line. And treating it as the finish line is exactly what lets that quiet erosion happen without you noticing. So what do you actually do with all of this? Not vague advice, actual steps. First, separate your money by function, not by feeling. You need a small amount of truly liquid cash, enough to cover 1 to 2 months of real expenses, sitting somewhere you can access instantly. That's your shock absorber. Everything beyond that, the 4, 5, 6 months of additional cushion, doesn't need to sit in a low-yield account doing nothing. It can sit in something that still stays relatively safe and liquid, but at least attempts to keep pace with inflation, so it's not silently losing value while it waits for an emergency that may or may not come. Second, run the actual math on your own savings once a year. Take your interest rate, subtract the current inflation rate, and look at that number honestly. If it's negative, your safety net has a hole in it, even if the balance keeps climbing. Third, when you get a raise, decide where a portion of it goes before it hits your account, before your lifestyle has a chance to quietly claim it. Even 20 or 30% of a raise, moved automatically into savings or investments the same day it arrives, breaks the pattern that keeps income growth from ever translating into security. Let me give you a picture of how this actually plays out, because it's easier to see in a real situation than in abstract numbers. Picture someone earning $75,000 a year, no debt beyond a car payment, doing everything the personal finance articles tell you to do. Rent takes up close to a third of the paycheck, which used to be the recommended ceiling and is now closer to the average. The car payment, higher than it would have been 5 years ago because vehicle prices climbed sharply during the supply shortages of the early 2020s, eats another chunk. Groceries, which have risen noticeably faster than overall inflation in several recent years, take a bigger bite than they used to for the exact same cart of food. By the time all of that clears, what's left gets swept into savings, and it feels responsible. It feels like winning. But if that leftover money sits in an account earning less than inflation, the version of this person who checks their balance in 12 months will see a bigger number and somehow feel more behind, not less. That's not a failure of discipline. That's a system quietly working against the discipline they already have. And last, and this might be the most important shift, Stop measuring your financial progress by the number on the screen and start measuring it by what that number can actually do. Two people can both have $50,000 saved and be in completely different financial positions, depending on where that money is sitting, what it's earning, and what it's losing to inflation in the background. The number was never the point. What the number can protect you from was always the point. There's also a comparison trap layered on top of all this, and it deserves a mention because it makes everything harder. Social comparison research has consistently shown that people judge their financial situation less by their actual numbers and more by how those numbers stack up against the people around them, coworkers, neighbors, friends from college who post their vacations. This is sometimes called relative deprivation, and it means you can be objectively doing better than you were 3 years ago and still feel worse, simply because the visible lifestyle of the people around you moved faster than yours did. It's not vanity. It's a wiring issue. The same brain that once used comparison to figure out where you stood in a small tribe now applies that exact same instinct to a curated highlight reel of hundreds of people you barely know. Understanding that this reaction is automatic, not a personal shortcoming, is often the first real relief people feel once they see it clearly. Look, none of this means panic, and it definitely doesn't mean chasing risky returns because you're scared of losing ground. That's its own trap. This is about something much quieter, just refusing to let safe be a word that goes unexamined. Your bank account isn't lying to you on purpose. It's just showing you one number when the number that actually matters is a different one entirely. Once you start looking at the real number instead of the comfortable one, the anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear overnight, but it stops being vague. It becomes something you can actually plan around. And that, more than any dollar amount, is what financial peace is usually made of.